I never thought a rented room could feel like this, like the moment before a heartbeat, suspended in warmth and something dangerously close to longing. She opened the door the first evening with a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Daniel," she said, voice low, even, carrying that calm only people who've lived through storms seem to have. Her name was Elena. My new landlady. My first impression was that she didn't waste words, she seemed to ration them, as though speech cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. The house was old, but kept with quiet care, faint traces of lavender polish, old wood breathing with the season. It was the kind of place that asked you to speak softly. I followed her down the narrow hall, her heels tapping lightly, the sound almost rhythmic. She gestured toward the spare room with her keys dangling from her hand. "It's not much," she said. "But it's clean." "It's perfect," I answered too quickly. Her eyes lifted, gray, sharp, assessing. For a second, I thought she might smile again, but instead, she only nodded. It took a week before I realized she had a way of filling silence. I'd hear her humming faintly through the kitchen window, or see her reading by the stairway light at midnight, robe loosely tied, one leg tucked beneath her. She was never trying to be seen, and maybe that's what made her impossible to ignore. One evening, rain pressed softly against the glass while I fixed the dripping faucet in the shared kitchen. She came up behind me, holding a towel. "You'll ruin that shirt," she murmured, setting the cloth on the counter. I turned too quickly again, and our hands brushed. Just a touch. Barely anything. But it felt like a small accident the universe had been waiting to stage. Her breath caught, just once, before she stepped back. "Sorry," I said, though I wasn't. "It's fine," she replied, but her tone had softened, gone quiet in a way that pulled me in closer than I should have gone. For a moment, all I could hear was the clock ticking, rain against the window, and the faint scent of her, something between jasmine and the echo of a memory I couldn't name. From that night on, every knock on her door carried weight. Sometimes it was just to ask about rent, or the leaky pipe, or the spare keys. But each time she opened it, the air between us changed, charged, delicate, dangerous. She'd stand there, her hair tied back loosely, a few strands falling forward, and I'd lose my words before I found them. "Daniel," she'd say, softly, not a question, not quite a greeting, just my name, as though she were testing the sound of it. And every time, something in me answered, not with words, but with the small ache of wanting to stay. Tonight was different. I don't even remember why I knocked, some excuse about the thermostat, maybe. But when she opened the door, she wasn't dressed for company. A thin sweater, bare feet, a cup of tea half forgotten on the table behind her. "Everything all right?" she asked. Yeah. The rest never came out. Her gaze held mine, steady, patient, and something in that silence unraveled the space between us. She stepped slightly aside, a quiet invitation I wasn't ready to understand. The hall clock ticked once. The rain outside eased into a whisper. And then, a sudden sound, the doorbell downstairs. She blinked, turned her head, and the moment shattered like glass. "Stay here," she said softly, already walking away. And as I stood there, heart thudding in my chest, I realized, every time I knocked, it wasn't the house I was hoping would open. It was her. The next few days blurred into quiet repetitions, footsteps across the same hallway, shared glances that lasted half a second too long. Every morning, I'd hear her coffee machine sputter to life before dawn, followed by the faint rustle of a newspaper. It became a kind of rhythm I depended on, even if I pretended not to. I learned things about her in pieces, the kind of things you only notice when you start to care. She never wore jewelry, except for a thin silver ring she turned absently when lost in thought. The way she'd stand by the window in the afternoons suggested she was waiting for something that never arrived. Once, while drying dishes beside her, I asked without thinking, "Do you ever get tired of the quiet?" She didn't look at me. "You learn to make peace with it," she said. Then, softer, "Eventually it becomes easier than noise." That was how I learned she had lived alone for years since her divorce. She didn't say it directly, but her pauses filled in the story, the careful phrasing, the way her eyes drifted somewhere behind me when she spoke about used to and before. I didn't tell her much about myself. Maybe because I didn't want to sound like the kind of boy who hadn't lived enough to understand her world. She was 45. I was 26. And though no one said it aloud, the line between us wasn't invisible. It was sharp and clear and constant. It was a Thursday when something shifted. I came home early, rain again pressing against the window panes. She was in the living room, on her knees by the coffee table, a box of old records spread around her. "I didn't know you liked vinyl," I said, setting my bag down. She smiled faintly, a tired, wistful curve of her mouth. "They belonged to my ex-husband. I kept the ones he hated." I laughed before realizing she wasn't joking. "You kept them just to spite him?" Her eyes lifted to mine. "No," she said. "Because I liked them first." That made me grin, and her face softened at that, the way people do when they forget to guard themselves. I knelt beside her, picked up a record, brushing dust from the sleeve. Her hand reached for the same one, and our fingers met halfway. Neither of us moved. Her hand was warm, smaller than I'd imagined. She didn't pull back right away, just looked at our hands, then at me. The air between us felt heavier, fragile. "Daniel," she whispered, barely audible. "Yeah." Her lips parted like she meant to say something else, something truer, but she only exhaled instead. The moment folded itself closed. She stood, brushing imaginary dust from her jeans, her composure returning like a coat she slipped back into. "Would you like some tea?" I nodded, pretending that's all I'd come for. But when she brushed past me toward the kitchen, her shoulder grazed mine, a touch so light it felt deliberate. And in that fleeting second, before she turned away, her eyes lingered, quiet, uncertain, asking something neither of us was ready to answer. It started as an ordinary evening, or maybe I just wanted to believe that. The sky had sunk into that color between blue and black, and the house hummed with rain again. I'd been helping Elena move boxes from the attic, dusted in memories neither of us wanted to unpack. She stood at the top of the stairs, one hand braced on the railing, a loose strand of hair stuck to her cheek. I reached out instinctively, brushed it away before I could think. Her breath caught, just slightly, and her eyes lifted to mine. "Careful," she murmured, her voice lower than usual. "You'll make me forget where I am." I didn't know how to answer that. My hand was still halfway raised, the air between us stretched tight. Then her phone buzzed on the table below, loud in the silence. She stepped back too quickly, the spell breaking. "Sorry," she said, descending the stairs. I heard the faint tremor in her tone, not fear exactly, but awareness. She read the message, her jaw tightening before she tucked the phone away. "Everything all right?" I asked. "It's just..." She hesitated. "A friend. Wondering why I've been so busy lately." The way she said busy made my chest tighten. We ended up in the kitchen again, the lights soft and amber. She poured us wine, said it was to thank me for helping, but neither of us touched the glasses right away. "I shouldn't get used to this," she said quietly, staring at the countertop. "To what?" "Having someone around. It makes the house feel different." Her hand rested near mine. The space between our fingers was nothing, yet everything. I leaned closer, just enough to see the tiny scar beneath her lip, the faint trace of perfume on her collar. She didn't move. "Elena." She closed her eyes at the sound of her name, like it hurt in a way she couldn't show. "You should go before." But her words trailed off when the wind pushed the kitchen window open, scattering papers from the table. We both reached for them, our hands colliding, palms pressing flat together for one suspended heartbeat. Neither of us let go. Her pulse fluttered under my thumb. She looked up, and this time, she didn't look away. Something in the room shifted, that quiet before gravity wins. I could see her struggle, the tug of war between what she wanted and what she was supposed to want. "I can't," she whispered, voice trembling. I'm not supposed to, I know, I said, though I didn't. We were inches apart. The kind of closeness that makes you forget the word distance ever existed. Then the door creaked open. A man's voice called from the entryway, older, unfamiliar. Elena? You home? Her body tensed. She pulled her hand from mine like it burned. It's just my neighbor, she whispered, quickly smoothing her hair. He checks on me sometimes. She forced a small smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. Go upstairs. Please. I hesitated, then stepped back toward the shadows of the staircase. When the door closed again and she turned back toward me, her breathing was unsteady. Neither of us spoke. But the look she gave me, a fragile mix of guilt and something dangerously like want, said everything words couldn't. And for the first time, I realized how close we already were to crossing the line neither of us could uncross. For 2 days we barely spoke. It wasn't anger. It was fear, the kind that follows you around the house like a shadow you can't shake. Every time I passed her door, I thought about that night, the words half swallowed, the way her breath had hitched before she sent me upstairs. I told myself it meant nothing. But lies, I was learning, can sound very close to prayers when whispered often enough. On the third night, I found her in the backyard, sitting on the old porch steps with a blanket around her shoulders. The moon caught in her hair like silver thread. She didn't turn when I came out, just said quietly, "You shouldn't be here." "I live here," I answered. "That's exactly the problem." Her voice cracked a little on the last word, and something inside me gave way. I sat beside her, not too close, but close enough to feel the heat of her skin through the thin layer of fabric. The air smelled of wet grass and something faintly floral, like the perfume she used when she wanted to feel put together. "I didn't mean for things to get," I started. "Complicated?" she finished for me. She gave a humorless laugh. "You're young, Daniel. You still think feelings come with clean edges." I looked at her, really looked, at the faint tired lines near her mouth, the way her fingers gripped the blanket as though it might hold her steady. "You talk like I don't know what this is," I said. "But I do." "No, you don't," she said sharply. Then softer. "Because if you did, you'd have walked away by now." The silence that followed felt alive, humming, waiting. I reached out without thinking, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. She froze, but didn't stop me. My fingertips grazed her skin, warm, smooth, trembling just slightly. Her breath hitched. "Don't," she whispered. I should have listened. But I leaned closer, drawn by something that wasn't logic, wasn't kindness, just her. "Elena," I said, my voice low, rougher than I meant. "Tell me to stop, and I will." Her lips parted. "I can't tell you that." The words hung there, fragile and fatal. She turned toward me, slow, uncertain, until her forehead nearly touched mine. I could feel the tremor in her breath, the faint trace of wine and mint between us. "I don't know how we got here," she whispered. "Maybe we were always going to," I murmured. Her hand lifted, brushed the back of mine, lingered there. Time seemed to stall, the kind of stillness that feels holy and wrong all at once. Then, just as the distance between us finally disappeared, a sharp knock at the front door. She jerked back, eyes wide, pulse visible at her throat. "Don't move," she said, standing too fast. "Please just don't." And as she slipped inside, leaving the door ajar, the echo of her warmth still clinging to my sleeve, I realized I was already too far gone to ever step back. The next morning began like any other, except everything between us had shifted, even in silence. She avoided my eyes at breakfast, moving carefully around the kitchen as though the air itself had turned fragile. I tried to act normal, poured coffee, asked if she'd slept well. She only hummed, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted her cup. But it wasn't until the phone rang that the facade cracked. She answered on speaker by mistake, her voice low, distracted, and I heard a man on the other end say, "You didn't tell me you had someone living with you again." Again. The word landed between us like a dropped plate. She fumbled to switch off the speaker, turned her back to me. I'll call you later, she said quickly, ending the call. When she turned around, her face was pale, composed, but her hands betrayed her, gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles whitened. Who was that? I asked. No one, she said too fast. Then quieter. My ex-husband. I took a step closer. He still checks up on you. She gave a tight laugh, brittle as glass. He owns the house, technically. It was part of the settlement. I didn't know what to say. The walls suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. So this. I gestured vaguely between us. If he found out, he won't, she said, but her voice wasn't steady. He can't. Something in me twisted, a strange mix of anger and protectiveness. Why do you still let him have that kind of control over you? Her eyes snapped to mine. Because I made mistakes, Daniel. The kind you don't fix just because someone new looks at you like you're worth forgiving. The words hit harder than I expected. She turned away, but I saw her shoulders tense, like she regretted saying it even as it left her mouth. I took another step forward. Close enough that I could see the fine tremor in her neck, the pulse fluttering beneath her skin. I don't look at you like that, I said quietly. I look at you because I can't help it. She turned then, too quickly, and we were face to face, close enough that I could feel her breath warm against my collar. Don't, she whispered. Please. But she didn't move away. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something rawer, more dangerous. He said once that anyone who got close to me would end up regretting it. I'm not him, I said. No, she breathed. You're not. The tension between us snapped like a wire pulled too tight. She brushed past me to leave, her shoulder grazing my chest, her scent lingering. But at the doorway she stopped. Maybe I should sell the house, she said softly. End the lease. Before either of us makes this worse. The words hung in the air, final and trembling. I didn't answer, couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized she wasn't threatening to leave. She was warning me she wouldn't be able to. The storm came back that night, harder, louder, relentless. It rattled the windows, shook loose leaves from the trees, and filled the house with a kind of restless energy that felt alive. I found her in the living room again, standing by the window, arms wrapped around herself. The rain light traced along her cheekbones, and for a moment she looked like someone caught between leaving and staying. You're supposed to be asleep, she said without turning. So are you. She gave a soft laugh, brittle, tired. Sleep doesn't come easy anymore. I stepped closer, slow, careful. Because of me? Her breath faltered. Because of what this is. The space between us thinned. I could feel the heat of her body through the air, the pulse of something fragile trying not to become real. You don't have to pretend you don't want this, I said quietly. Her head turned then, her eyes finding mine, the kind of look that strips you down to the truth you've been avoiding. You think it's that simple? She whispered. You think I haven't already thought of every reason this shouldn't happen? Maybe, I said, but I'm still here. She exhaled, a trembling sound that wasn't quite a sigh. I reached out, hesitated, then brushed my fingers against her arm. She didn't move away. I hate that you make me feel young again, she murmured, almost to herself. I smiled faintly. That's not a bad thing. It is, she said. Because it makes me forget how it ends. Her voice cracked on that last word. I stepped closer until she was backed against the window frame, our reflections blurred in the glass. My hand rested near her waist, not touching, just close enough that she could choose which way the world would tilt. Elena, I whispered. Tell me what you want. She closed her eyes. The rain hit the glass in uneven rhythm, the only sound between us. I want, she said slowly, to stop wanting you. Her eyes opened, and they were wet, not from tears, but from the effort of holding herself together. Then stop, I said softly. She gave a shaky laugh. You make it sound easy. It's not, I said. That's how I know it's real. For a heartbeat, either of us moved. Then she reached up, fingers trembling, and touched my face. just her fingertips against my jaw, light as a confession. "This isn't who I planned to be," she whispered. "I don't think either of us planned this," I said. Her hand lingered, her thumb brushing the corner of my mouth, 1 inch closer, and there would have been no turning back. Then she stepped back, breath unsteady, but eyes steady now. "I needed to know," she said. "Know what?" "That I could stop," she answered, voice breaking, but sure. "Before it became something I couldn't undo." And though the space between us felt unbearable, there was something honest in it, something that wasn't there before. Understanding. Not surrender. Not escape. Just truth. We stood there a long time, either of us speaking, while the rain softened outside, as if the world had exhaled for us. Morning came slowly. The storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean, quiet except for the low hum of the city waking up beyond the wet streets. I found her in the kitchen, still in her robe, hair loosely tied, the steam from her mug curling upward in soft, lazy ribbons. She didn't look surprised to see me, just tired, peaceful, like someone who'd finally stopped running from herself. "Coffee?" she asked, voice gentle. I nodded. "Always." We stood side by side at the counter, either of us speaking for a while. The silence wasn't awkward anymore, it had changed shape, settled into something honest. When she finally spoke, her tone was lighter, steady. "I kept thinking about last night." "So did I." She smiled faintly. "I figured." I laughed under my breath. "You're not angry?" She turned to face me fully, cup cradled in both hands. "No. Just relieved that we stopped before we lost ourselves." She paused, then added softly, "And scared because I don't want to lose you either." That last line caught me off guard, not for what it meant, but for how quietly true it sounded. I stepped closer, close enough that I could see the tiny gold flecks in her gray eyes. "You won't," I said. Her lips parted, a quiet breath escaping, but she didn't answer. Instead, she reached up and smoothed the collar of my shirt, a small, familiar gesture that said more than any confession could. "I don't know what this is," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "But it feels real. Maybe that's enough." "Maybe it is," I said. Outside, sunlight spilled through the blinds, slicing the room into soft, gold lines. She set her cup down, then, without thinking, without hesitation, stepped into me. Her arms circled my waist, slow, deliberate. I felt her exhale against my chest, the sound fragile but content. My hands found her back, fingers brushing the fabric of her robe, and for a moment neither of us said anything. This wasn't the rush of desire that had haunted us before. It was quieter, deeper, something that felt like home. "I used to think love was something you outgrow," she murmured. "Something that belongs to younger people, to mistakes and beginnings." "And now?" I asked. "No," she said, tilting her head up slightly. "I think maybe it just changes shape." Her forehead rested against mine, a simple closeness that made the world outside disappear. No grand declarations. No promises we couldn't keep. Just this, two people who'd finally stopped pretending not to feel. We stood like that until the coffee went cold, until the lights softened again, until silence became a language we both understood. When she finally pulled back, she smiled, small, real, unguarded. "You should go before I start making breakfast for two," she teased gently. "Too late," I said. "I'm already hungry." She laughed then, the kind of laugh that breaks tension, not hearts. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I realized she wasn't just my landlady. She was the reason it felt like coming home.